Shalom Aleichem.
Aleichem Shalom, Rabbi.
How you doing? Nice to see you yet again. So has anyone seen, I'm going to give my drush on it this week because it relates to the Haftarah. Has anyone seen the trending hashtag Jewish space lasers?
No, I haven't seen.
Okay.
About splitting the sea?
So Marjorie Greene, Congresswoman from Georgia, we have a wacky left, so we have a wacky right. So she said that a few years back, she said that the fires in California were caused by the Rothschild secret space lasers. So the hashtag on Twitter and Facebook is, proliferating thousands, hashtag Jewish space lasers. So then a long time ago, there was a film called History of the World by Mel Brooks. And at the end of the film, he has a minute on his part 2 that he never did called Jews in Space, with Jews firing lasers in space from Mugging David shaped spaceships. And so everyone's posting that. But turns out there's a reference to aliens and space lasers in Devorah, because Devorah describes how the very stars left their paths to fight. I have someone here to fight the Sisera and his mighty army. So some say it was meteors, some say it was the inhabitants of other planets. It's a whole medrash. But at any rate, exactly this week that it's trending, there's a discussion of projectiles from space protecting the Jews. Anyway, so it's an interesting connection. But here we are in the actual Torah portion, and we come to Az Yashir, the Song of the Sea. That's the very end of the Sidra, which we read on Friday and Shabbat. We have it in our prayer books. It's pretty common, but I'm just going to post here the very end, which actually talks about the Song of Miriam. So after we give the whole Moshe of Bnei Yisrael, we have here the song. Let me go back to Shmos. Just one moment. So here we have the Torah readings. We have Beshalach right here. I'm going to go to the end of Beshalach, which should be over here. And hold on. I'm gonna show it all to you in a minute. So I want to find. So here's the song. And 1, 2, 3, share. Okay. So here's the Song of the Sea. Az Yashir Moshe, then saying Moshe and the children of Israel. We say it every day in the prayers. And then at the end, what happens? Then it says, Vatikach Miriam Hanaviyah Achot Aaron, Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel, the tambourine in her hand, or a drum, different translations, and all the women followed her, besufim of mecholot, with tambourines, with timbrels of mecholot, and circular dances. A mechol is a circular dance, sort of like a hora, but whatever they had back then. And Miriam sang to them responsively, because like the way we sometimes do Hallel, Shiru Hashem ki ga'oga, praise Hashem because he's very great, the horse and his rider thrown into the sea. And she, of course, this is the beginning, and she recited the same song that Moshe did. So the obvious question is, how come she had musical instruments and the men, it just says they sang? So the Talmud says that the women, that the men, they didn't bring musical instruments with them, but the women did, because the women were confident that there would be more miracles to celebrate, so they were all ready to celebrate. And that's why they had musical instruments and the men didn't. And in general, we find that by the golden calf, it says that the men took off their jewelry. Aaron said, get your wives and daughters jewelry. But the women refused to give their jewelry, so the men had to give it themselves. And also with the spies, the women did not share the same skepticism the men did. So in the desert, on the whole, the women always had more faith than the men did. So the question is, though, why is Miriam called a prophetess? Because when and I mentioned this in the past, that when after Aaron was born, came the decree to drown the Jewish babies in the river. So Amram, Moses' father, who was sort of the head of the Jewish people at the time, as they looked up to him, he separated himself from his wife. He says, why should I have babies if they're going to be drowned? So Miriam said that Miriam, who was then 6 years old, told him that you're worse than Pharaoh, because Pharaoh wants to drown the boys, but you're going to kill the boys and the girls, all the girls who won't be born. So he took his 6-year-old daughter's reproach to heart and took back Yocheved, and Moses was born. When Moses was born, Miriam predicted not only would he survive, but that he would redeem the Jewish people. And that's why she's called Miriam HaNeviah, Miriam the prophetess. That's the prophecy we know about. There may have been many others, but this is why she's called Miriam the prophetess. Now, another interesting thing is that later in the Tanakh, when we talk about how God is sort of giving a reprise of how he's helped the Jewish people through the ages, he says, I sent you Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. I sent you Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, and Miriam is one of the 3 people who is mentioned, who God sent to redeem the Jewish people from the land of Israel. Now, an interesting question, because this is in other words, earlier we have her described as Moshe's sister. I'm going to show you. All the way in chapter 1. Okay, and then here we are. Here, so you see it says, and his sister stood far off, but we don't know who that sister is. This is the first time that her name is mentioned, that Miriam's name is mentioned. So the question is, why was she called Miriam? Because Miriam means bitter. And when she was born, she was 86 at the time of the Exodus. There was progressive persecution of the children of Israel, but the actual full-on slavery began when she was born. So her parents called her Miriam because that was the bitter year. However, right afterwards, they come to Mara. They couldn't drink from the waters of Mara because they were bitter. And the people complained, and Hashem showed Moshe a piece of wood, a tree. He throws it into the water and it becomes sweet. So we know the place as Mara because it's the place where the bitter became sweet. So too, when Miriam was born, Miriam guaranteed the birth of Moses. And therefore, her name is bitter, but it's really about transforming the bitter to the sweet, because it's at this very nadir of the Jewish people's fortunes, the Moses is born. So her name remained Miriam. In other words, even though sometimes we change people's names in the Tanakh, the name remains Miriam to remind us that just like the bitter water that became sweet, that sometimes the bitterness itself leads to sweetness. In other words, it's only the experience of the slavery in Egypt that enabled the Jewish people to become who they became, because they were in a hopeless position and God redeems them. They're able to appreciate God's power. In other words, the famous story, someone is driving around looking desperately for a parking space in Manhattan, and he says, God, I'll give $100 to charity if you only find me a parking space. And then just at that moment, the truck pulls out, leaving a huge parking space. He says, oh God, forget it. I found one on my own. And but of course, the point of this story is that people can easily forget to acknowledge that their good fortune comes from God. In the case of the depths of slavery in Egypt, a powerless people oppressed by the mightiest empire in the world, and the spectacular way in which God took us out of Egypt, it's impossible to deny the hand of God in history. And that, of course, is what the basis of the faith of the Jewish people. So it's specifically the bitterness, the tremendous impossibility of redemption that is reversed by these incredible miracles that give us sort of our sense of God being present in history. And also, much of the Torah is built on don't be like what you saw in Egypt. Don't oppress the stranger, because the Egyptians took advantage of you when you were strangers. You know, don't behave dishonestly with weights and measures in your business, because the Egyptians were dishonest. Don't be immoral in your relationships, because the Egyptians were immoral. In other words, it is the combination of power and its abuse, of wealth and immorality that the Jewish people are constantly admonished against. And having the bad example of Egypt gives us the ability to know and to be able to understand and to be able to experience how not to be. And sometimes the lesson of how not to be drives us to how we should be. You know, my wife and I know someone who grew up in an extremely chaotic, abusive, neglectful family. And he happens to be the most wonderful father and husband. And we were once talking about this, and he volunteered the information. He says, basically, every time I wonder what to do as a husband, how to deal with my children, I just look back on my childhood and do exactly the opposite of what my parents did. And sometimes that's more powerful that's more powerful than any positive example. You know what not to be, and you see the horrors of what you shouldn't be. Sometimes this leads us to a place of knowing exactly what to do. So Miriam's name, which expresses the bitterness of Egypt, is in itself the expression of the fact that we can process bitterness and make it into sweetness, that we can learn exactly how not to be. Because when we stare into the abyss and see where the abyss leads, the knowledge of the good is that much more powerful. If you tell someone, be good, okay, be good. You say someone, be good because the opposite is too horrible to contemplate, that's far more powerful. So our experience of suffering in Egypt and our witnessing of the corruption of Egypt is what allows us, hopefully, to be as we should be, and to move to the good, because we have the lesson of the bad. And that's why Miriam's name remains Miriam. We don't change it like Yaakov's name. We don't change it for a better name, because there's nothing more powerful than being handed lemons and making lemonade. There's nothing more powerful than taking bitterness and turning it into goodness, because that transformation is the challenge with which we're all given. Life is never perfect. The world is never perfect. And it's our job to take the imperfections and make something positive out of them. And that's the idea of leaving Egypt. Yes, yes, Sylvia.
So that really explains the activism of the Jewish people, even in current times.
I think
activism
so.
or the time, I guess activism in any area that seems to require it.
That's absolutely true, because you have a sense that God made you a witness to injustice, and God showed you the power of doing what's right, and that the good and the just can prevail, and we just don't accept the world that it is. So yeah, I think this even people might not be so personally involved in Judaism. That fundamental lesson is there, and it's not accidental that Jews are highly represented in every charitable and positive endeavor, because the Torah doesn't just speak that the Jewish people should be grateful. The Torah speaks, especially the Nevi'im, the prophets speak about the idea that what the Jewish people learned should enable them to, in essence, share with the world and teach to the world and transform the world. And as a matter of fact, it says in the Talmud that the Jewish people only went into exile so they should acquire converts. Of course, the question is, historically, there have been very few converts. So the answer is, according to the Kabbalists, it doesn't just mean converts. It means all the experiences and realities of the world that we convert, that we transform, all the negative things that we transform to the good by virtue of applying what Judaism teaches us to each situation we're in. Because we've been through many difficult and harsh situations and created something good out of them. And this idea of transforming darkness into light, bitterness into sweetness, is the essence of what Judaism asks of us. So it's very true, Sylvia. The experience of the Jewish people is precisely what drives them to the recognition that there is no negative situation that can't be transformed if we only make the effort. Okay, so that is the end of the Parsha, and that is wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and thank you very much for joining us.
Shabbat
Thank you, Rabbi, and a Shabbat Shalom to you.
Shabbat Shalom,
and all.
everyone. All the
Thank you,
best.
Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.